Previous video for my top 5 picks for a reliable car for under $1,500. Or was it my sketchy used car dealer / 70s porn star mustache that you saw in that video? But anyhow, today I'll give you my top 10 picks for the least reliable car that you can buy for under $5,000. So first let me explain to you the criteria I used to pick the 10 cars I did for this video. So first criteria was whether these cars had a major defect or a common problem with either their transmission or engine. The second criteria was the rate or the percentage of the vehicles the defect from the first criteria affected. And the third criteria was the cost of repair or replacement of the engine or the transmission. So with that said, let's start with number 10, which is a Subaru Outback. Now I actually personally like this car and it was hard putting it in this top 10 list, but these cars do have a chronic head gasket issue. And this issue affects their infamous boxer engine, which is a 2.5 liter 4-cylinder engine. And this engine is not only in the Subaru Outback, but in the Subaru Forester, Subaru Legacy, and the Subaru Baja. Now, if I had to pick a range, this head gasket issue affected most of the Subarus with these engines from the year 2000 to 2005. But it was also common from as early as 1994 all the way up to 2011, where Subaru claims to have fixed this issue. But in my personal opinion, the jury is still out whether they fixed this issue or not. Also, if you remember, a few years ago, I rebuilt one of these engines where the number 1 cylinder had developed a rod knock. Cylinder number 1. Also, since then, I've seen a couple of more Subarus with a rod knock at the number 1 cylinder. However, I doubt that this issue is as bad or chronic as the head gasket issue. Now, if you want my theory why the head gasket on these fails so often, it's pretty simple actually. These cylinder heads are simply too small. This is only really 9 or 10 inches across. Also on these engines, not only the cylinder head is made out of aluminum, but also the cylinder block is made out of aluminum. And aluminum is simply a softer metal and it warps easier due to overheating. Add to that, the cylinder heads being so small, you have much less tolerance for warpage. Now anyway, with that said, the good news is that the labor cost for replacing the cylinder head or the cylinder head gaskets on these cars is not that big. It only takes a few hours to remove these engines and remove the cylinder heads and a few more hours to put them back. And that's why these Subarus are at number 10 and not lower. So next up, coming in strong at number 9 is a 2002 to 2006 Nissan Altima with their infamous QR25 2.5 liter 4-cylinder engine. Now these engines are also used in the Nissan Sentra SERs in the same year range. Now again, I personally like the way these cars handle and the power that 4-cylinder engine has. But similar to the Subaru, these guys suffer from a chronic head gasket issue. These engines not only have an aluminum cylinder head, but they also have an aluminum cylinder block. But unfortunately for the owners of these cars, the replacement of the head gasket on these engines is going to be costly. Because unlike the Subarus, in order to get to the head gaskets on these cars is going to require a lot of labor hours. But that's not even the worst of it. The worst of it is if the head gasket goes bad on these cars once, it is not unheard of for it to go bad often after that. Alright, up next, coming in at number 8 is the first generation Saturn Vue. Now these cars were made from 2002 to 2005, but we're specifically talking about the ones with the 2.2 liter Ecotec Saturn engines. Now these engines themselves are okay, they're actually not bad engines, but the transmissions that come with these engines, or in other words, GM's sad attempt at making a CVT transmission for these cars is really bad. Now these transmissions were also available for the 2003 and 2004 Saturn Ions as well. So if you're looking for a Saturn Ion, or even worse, a Saturn Vue in those years, you really want to make sure that it does not have a CVT transmission. But next, coming in at number 7 for a double whammy is another product by Nissan, and specifically a Nissan Maxima between 2004 to 2007. Now this is a pity because up to 2003, Nissan Maximas are actually fairly reliable. But starting at 2004, Nissan Maximas started having a lot of transmission issues. You really need to stay away from these Nissan Maximas because not only the transmission is a real piece of work, but the engine has major issues as well, which is a defective timing chain tensioner, and as a result, a worn timing chain, which will result in rattling noise, especially at startup. But again, replacing those two items is going to require a lot of labor hours. In fact, I'm pretty sure in order to get to them, it is recommended that you remove the engine from the engine bay and work on the engine outside in order to get to the timing chain tensioner and your timing chain, which in so many words is going to cost an arm and a leg. All right, next up, coming in at number 6 is the second generation Honda Odyssey. Now these were made from 1999 to 2004 and they come with a 3.5 liter V6 engine with both a 4-speed and later on a 5-speed automatic transmission. And that's exactly where the problem is. Honda's automatic transmissions in these years. Yes, these are some of the worst transmissions Honda has ever built. The defective rate on these is really high. You're almost guaranteed a failed transmission. The cost of replacement or for a rebuild is also very high. All right, next coming in at number 5 is any Kia or Hyundai with their 2.4 liter Theta 2 engine. Now the years these engines had the most issues was from 2006 to 2010. And these engines were used in quite a few different Hyundai and Kia products, but mainly the Kia Optima and the Hyundai Sonata had these engines. And the problem is that a lot of people have reported that their engines has developed a rod knock, even though they've taken meticulous care of their engine and have done all the oil changes on time with the correct oil. Or even worse than that, it's not unheard of for these engines to throw a rod right through the cylinder block going at highway speeds, which of course results in complete loss of power, and while you're going at highway speeds, that could result in a potentially dangerous situation. All right, so coming in at number 4, it's another Honda product, and not to be outdone by Nissan, they're in for a double whammy with their Acura TLs. Specifically Acura TLs from 1999 to 2003. These cars come with a 3.2 liter V6 VTEC engine, which I should say is a pretty good engine. It's pretty reliable, has enough power for a fun ride. But again, similar to the Honda Odyssey, these cars come with a terrible transmission. Now, I don't think these were the same exact transmissions that were being used in the Honda Odysseys, but it sure was the same exact crappy technology. And in fact, there are Acura TLs out there that have high mileage, and that's again because the engines on these cars is actually pretty decent, and with proper maintenance can last quite a while. But they are on their second, third, or maybe even fourth transmission. All right, next up at number 3, and for a change of pace, it's time for some Euro trash, namely the Land Rover Discovery 2. Now these Discovery 2s were produced from 1999 to 2004, and they came with a 4.0 liter V8 or a 4.6 liter V8 engine. Now these engines were also used in the Land Rover, Range Rover as well, so you'll want to keep that in mind. But again, the problem with these engines was a frequent head gasket failure. And speaking of these engines, lucky for you, I have one on an engine stand right here. So yes, the main issue is that the head gasket fails on these. And you guessed it, the engine block is also made out of aluminum. See, this magnet is not sticking to it. And the second problem is that the oil pump, which goes right here in front of the engine and runs off the crankshaft, goes bad from time to time as well. Bad oil pump, no oil pressure, bad rod bearing, need new engine. Now the third problem, which I have not experienced personally, is that these sleeves, which as you can see are not made out of aluminum, like to wander off or break and cause engine noise as well, which equals either engine rebuild or a new engine. And as if that was not enough, from time to time the transmissions on these cars get severely damaged as well. And it's usually not due to any of the internals of these transmissions, but rather the front drive shaft on these cars. See, the front drive shaft on these cars is located right next to the transmission on the left side. These front drive shafts like to explode and break apart from time to time. And when that happens, they fling around and wham, smack right into the transmission and break the aluminum casing of the transmission. Now, the failure rate of all the defects I just listed is not super high on these cars, but when you have so many of them, I guess it doesn't really matter. All right, next, coming strong at number 2 is an American-made vehicle by Chrysler. And yes, it's none other than the famous Chrysler Sebring with the 2.7 liter V6 engine. Now these engines were used in the Sebring from 2001 to 2004, but they were also used in the Dodge Intrepid, Dodge Stratus, and the Chrysler Concorde. And the main issue with these engines is engine sludge and oil contamination. Now Chrysler claims that this is due to a problem with the PCV or the positive crankcase ventilation system. But wait, there's even more. You see, Chrysler decided to put this water pump on these engines, and it comes with a bad gasket. Now normally when the gasket or the seal on the water pump fails, you simply have an external leak. If the seal failed on these water pumps, coolant could find itself to the inside of your engine or where your crankshaft, your crankcase is. So yeah, when Chrysler was designing these engines, it gathered all its engineers and told them, I want you guys to come up with the most number of ways where we can f this engine. So with that said, coming in at number 1 is an American for the gold medal. And by that, I'm talking about any GM made products with the famous 4.6 liter North Star engine. Now these engines were used in a lot of different GM made cars, but mainly in the Cadillac Eldorados, Cadillac Seville's, and Cadillac DeVille's, starting from the mid-90s, I believe, to the mid-2000s. Now the problem with these engines is that they again suffer from a high rate of head gasket failure. Now some blame this on the poor quality of the torque to yield bolts GM uses on the cylinder heads. Yet others blame simply the design of these engines. You see, GM designed these engines to not overheat easily, funny enough, but they have very low tolerance for overheating at the same time. So if you overheat them a little bit, you are sure to blow the head gasket on these engines. And if you do that, you're going to need another engine, or if you decide to repair the head gasket, and if you're doing this at a shop, the labor costs are going to be through the roof. Yeah, in fact, it's actually going to be so bad, most shops might even turn you away or ask for your left kidney. Either way, it's going to suck for you. Now, if you're thinking, hey, you just made it sound like there's hardly any reliable used cars out there. Well, that's not true. I already have a video on the 5 reliable cars under 1500, but next week, I'm going to make a video for the top 10 reliable cars for under 5,000. So make sure you stay tuned for that. But until then, you can check out, as we talked about, my other videos, of which I put links to on this side and also links down below in the description box as well. All right, thanks guys for watching. I'll see you guys soon.